Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Wednesday night, and this is Farage at Large, live from Cardiff. Please welcome your host, Nigel Farage.
Good evening, we're live here in Cardiff, where the Welsh Parliament has just banned GB News from their television sets. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. I've got some fresh stuff on debanking ahead tomorrow of the big NatWest board meeting. We've got Welsh stories, national stories, international stories, great guests. Stay with us. First, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening to you. Well, our top story tonight. BBC boss Tim Davies has faced an unprecedented grilling from MPs over the broadcaster's failure to label Hamas as a terrorist organisation. Conservative MPs are understood to have become increasingly concerned over the BBC's coverage of the Israel-Hamas conflict. Today's meeting was requested by the 1922 committee, which represents Conservative backbenchers. Tory MP Jonathan Gullis spoke to GB News after the meeting, saying he was shocked that Tim Davies would not agree to calling Hamas terrorists because it may hurt some people's feelings.
To me, this is mind-boggling. Everyone knows that Hamas is a terrorist organisation. It's a prescribed terrorist organisation here in this country. Every other news agency, like the great GB News, also considers this to be a terrorist organisation. What on earth the Director General thinks is going on, I don't know, but he is so far out of touch with the people of this great country, and particularly the Jewish community, not just here but around the world. He's brought shame upon this institution and has made the case why now more than ever the British taxpayer should have to continue paying the telly tax.
In the meantime, in Israel, the Prime Minister says he's warning his country is preparing for a ground invasion now of Gaza. Benjamin Netanyahu refused to give details of the offensive, but again urged Palestinians in the Gaza Strip to evacuate to the south of the country. That comes as Israel has reportedly agreed to delay its ground invasion to allow the US to place missile defence systems around their assets in the Middle East. Meanwhile, here the Prime Minister's refusing to support calls for a ceasefire despite pressure from more than 80 MPs to do so. Instead, Rishi Sunak is backing specific pauses, he says, in the conflict to allow for the safe delivery of aid to the territory. 5 British people are among those still being held hostage in Gaza. Now, Peter Bone has been suspended from the House of Commons for 6 weeks over bullying and sexual misconduct of a staff member. The Wellingborough MP denies the allegations but has already been expelled from the Tory party. It means another by-election's looming for Rishi Sunak as a recall petition will now be arranged. A former South Wales police officer has been jailed for life with a minimum term to serve of 12 years for sexual offences against children. Lewis Edwards used fake social media accounts and posed as a teenager to groom more than 200 girls online. He forced his victims to take indecent photographs of themselves, using the material then to blackmail them. In sentencing, the judge described his behaviour as cruel and sadistic. And just lastly, the GB News presenter Anne Diamond has been made an OBE at Buckingham Palace today. The journalist received the honour from His Majesty King Charles for her services to public health and to charity, and it recognised her campaigning efforts for research into cot death following the death of her own son Sebastian from sudden infant death syndrome. Our congratulations to Anne. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. And now it's time to cross to Nigel Farage and say hello to Cardiff.
Good evening. I'm live in Cardiff. Yeah. No. I did say last week that I was coming to Cardiff, and it didn't take me very long to get here. Now, here's the really good news, that according to Condé Nast Traveller, Cardiff, with an outstanding score, has just been voted as the best city in the entire United Kingdom. So there you are. Give yourselves a clap. However, there are parts of Cardiff that I don't think are operating perhaps in the way they ought to be. One of them is the Welsh Parliament, the Speaker of which has decided to ban GB News from television sets within that building, and that's why I've decided to come down here today. I'm going to be discussing that in a moment with Andrew RT Davies and possibly getting some reaction from the crowd. But that kind of censorship against a, legal, registered, regulated news channel just based on the really, really small-minded opinions of this woman, Ellen Jones, frankly, I think is a disgrace, and we will fight to get it overturned. Now, I have been having a little bit of trouble with the banks over the course of the last few months. And tomorrow, the NatWest board meet to decide whether Dame Alison Rose, in a bank that is nearly 40% owned by us, will walk out with a payout of £11.3 million. In the course of the last hour, the Financial Times have broken a story, and it comes from the Information Commissioner's Office. The ICO have confirmed the details of the report and said in a statement, "We have been clear with the bank that these actions were unacceptable and should never happen again. Dame Alison Rose has breached data protection laws. She has breached client confidentiality. And it's not just me saying that. This is the Information Commissioner's Office. And it would be an outrage, as I say, if she walked away with a huge sum of money, 40% of which is funded by you at home and these people in the room. We need genuine reform of our banking system. Now, one of the reasons I finished up in such hot water with the bank was because of a South Wales distinguished Member of Parliament. He represents the Rhondda. His name is Sir Chris Bryant. And earlier on today, GB News reporter Ben Leo caught up in Westminster with Sir Chris. Listen in.
Ben Leo, GB News. Enjoyed your talk. Would you like to make a proper apology to Nigel Farage for the fake news that you spread about his Russia links?
I have corrected the record in the House of Commons, and that's all I'm going to do.
You did, but it was a rather mealy-mouthed apology in July, just before recess, to an empty chamber. So, would you like to take the opportunity to do it now?
I'm not saying anything more, I'm afraid. But thanks very much for asking.
Because, Chris, the lies you spread have had a long-lasting effect. NatWest cancelled Nigel, and the trove of documents he unearthed yesterday showed that they were repeated by NatWest staff, and that was the reason they debanked him. You incorrectly said that Christopher Chandler had links to Russia. You had to amend the record for that. You misled the Leveson inquiry. You said that the 2016 coup in Turkey was linked to Brexit. You're meant to be cleaning up Parliament. You've just given an hour talk on cleaning up Parliament, but you're part of the problem, aren't you?
I'm very happy for you to broadcast whatever you want, but
why don't you just
afraid
apologise properly to Nigel, and we can be done with it?
I've corrected the record in the House of Commons, which is the correct way to do things.
I mean, you were chair of the Standards Committee, but how was that so when your standards are so sloppy? Your track record's not particularly great when it comes to the truth, is it? One last opportunity. No proper apologies to Nigel?
Careful.
No proper apology. Would you like to come into Nigel's show and have a chat with him properly about it?
I have regularly turned down the offer of appearing on GB News. Thank you very much.
That's a big shame.
Thank you very much. A big shame. Well, there we are. Well done, Ben Leo. I've been looking forward to somebody catching up with Sir Chris Bryant, whose mealy-mouthed apology to me took place on the last afternoon before recess to an empty chamber and wasn't reported by the press, and he didn't even mention my name in the so-called apology. Now, back to banning of media organisations. I'm pleased to say that I'm joined by Andrew RT Davies, leader of the Conservatives here in the Welsh Parliament. Welcome to the programme this evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Great to see you in Cardiff.
Yeah, well, do you know, we were in Newport just the other week, and we were in Port Talbot not long before that, so we are bringing GB News to Wales as much as we can.
All great places, but as you said in your introduction, Cardiff is the best city in the UK. Not just Wales, but the UK.
Well, that's what these people think, so...
Well, big cheer, big cheer.
Very good. No, I hadn't planned to come to Cardiff. It wasn't on the rota this quickly. But I'm afraid that Edin Jones from the Welsh Parliament, the SANEF, has brought me here. What on earth? By the way, we did write to Mark Drakeford about the fact the channel's been banned inside the Parliament, and he said nothing to do with me. Well, it's true. Actually, directly, this isn't... I mean, we may blame him for other things, it's possible, but we can't blame him for this.
How long have you got?
You'll get your chance, don't worry. Yeah, this wasn't directly him, but he could have made a comment. Andrew, what is going on when GB News, which is an established brand, both on radio and television, growing quickly, often beating other rivals, have we been wrapped on the knuckles by Ofcom? Did a stupidity occur on the channel a few weeks ago? Yes. And in what organisation don't stupidities occur? But what is going on when we get banned?
GB News took swift action when that comment came. They dismissed the person who made those comments, and that was the right course of action. But you said in those remarks there, he has said nothing. And neither of the other leaders within the Welsh Parliament said anything other than myself. It's about choice, it is, at the end of the day. You don't have to tune into GB News. No. You don't have to buy the Guardian newspaper. But we live in a democracy, and I'm wearing a poppy today, and that shows our remembrance, our act of remembrance for people who fought so that we could maintain democracy and maintain choice. And in a democracy, you have the plurality of the media so people can choose the views that they want to buy into.
So what is the
ban
mindset?
That in the Welsh Parliament.
So what is the mindset, Andrew? I mean, by the way, we did invite Ellen Jones onto the show. We got no answer at all. But
busy doing her hair, no doubt.
Yeah, well, maybe. What is the mindset? What is the mindset?
Well, it's about control at the end of the day, because obviously they don't want any dissenting voices, as they see it, or an alternative voice in their parliament. It's not their parliament, it's the people's parliament, and it's for the people to decide who sits in that parliament. And if people are disgusted by these acts of censorship by the Speaker or the presiding officer, they need to exercise their vote in 2026 and make that change happen, because ultimately this is a direct assault on the news, on the Fourth Estate, that hold politicians like myself to account. And you can't pick and choose your favourites. You have to take the rough and tumble. And as I said, going back to your earlier comment, I think the key thing here is there has been precious little comment from the First Minister, from the leader of the Welsh Nationalists, who, if it had been one of their chosen left-wing papers, like the Morning Star, for example, they would have broken down in an emotional breakdown.
Well, you know, as I say, we gave her the chance to come on the show. She said that she wouldn't, but I find it a very, very worrying trend. Now, there are other areas, and I do sort of think, well, I look at what the waiting lists are in Wales for the National Health Service, I look at delivery of other public services in Wales, and you have to ask, and people have voted for devolved government in Wales, but you have to begin to ask whether it's actually working for the Welsh people. But I just wonder, when I see things being banned, when I see blanket speed limits, when I see a health service that is doing even worse than England, I mean, that takes some doing these days, but it is. I wonder, is this the prototype for what a national Labour government would be after the general election next year? That's my concern.
Well, Keir Starmer's on record as saying, for what we would do if we came at the government in Westminster, look to what we're doing in Wales. He actually called it his blueprint for government. 1 in 4 people are on a waiting list here in Wales. 1 in 4. That's a massive number of the population, over 750,000 people. 27,000 of them are waiting 2 years or more. And when I say them, that's all of us. That's people in this room who've come from communities the length and breadth of Wales.
And is that why Mark Drayford got very upset with you the other week?
He tends to throw his papers around and start shouting a bit. He does, yes. And goes very red in the face.
Well, I have to say, I rather enjoyed watching it.
That's my job.
No, I did, because it reminded me of the response I used to get to European commissioners. But here's the problem, Andrew RT Davies. However badly Labour might be doing in terms of delivering good local government in Wales, and I think most people, even many Labour voters, would agree that it's not working out very, very well. Yet another Conservative national member of Parliament, Peter Bone, today, has been suspended for 6 weeks. There'll be another by-election in Wellingborough. They'll probably lose that as well. If you look at the national polls, the Labour Party are simply miles ahead. And they're miles ahead, Andrew, not because people have a huge belief or faith, in my opinion, in Keir Starmer, that we look safe and solid compared to Jeremy Corbyn, but people just think your lot got into office in 2019 with a stonking great majority, didn't really believe what they said, haven't delivered. And it's very difficult, despite whatever's happening in Wales or anywhere else. Do you actually think the Tory party's got a cat's chance in hell next year against Starmer's Labour?
Yes, I do. If we're clear in our message and we stick to our commitments. We've seen that recently with the blanket 20 MPH. When Labour introduced the blanket 20 MPH here in Wales, we had a record number of petition signatories signed up to a Welsh parliamentary petition of 460,000.
No, it's amazing.
And so when people know who's at fault and they can hold them to account, they don't like what they can see.
No.
And I think as the closer we get to an election, people will look at the Labour Party, look at their record here in Wales, because it is their blueprint for what they want to do across the rest of the country. But we've got to rise to the challenge as well. And we have to deliver a narrative of how we're going to empower people.
As you say, your message, vote Conservative, and anybody born after 2009 can't buy cigarettes in a shop. Is that the message?
Well, I'm a libertarian at the end of the day, and I believe in choice, informed choice, and it goes back to the opening conversation.
So what is the message?
But the point
what is the message? Why should we vote Conservative next year, Andrew Davies?
Because we're the party on your side that will deliver for you, your family and your community. We'll unleash your potential. No one should be left behind, and ultimately we will stand up and deliver.
The trouble with that is, Labour will be saying exactly the same thing. Andrew, thank you for coming on and giving a very spirited defence of your views. In a moment, we went out onto the streets of Cardiff earlier on today to find out just how popular the 24/7, 20-mile-per-hour speed limit was. I can't wait to see the results. Thank you.
We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Cardiff. Now, I have to say, I don't have a problem. I don't mind driving at 20 miles an hour max between 8 and 9 in the morning and 3 and 4 in the afternoon outside primary schools, outside hospital entrances. That makes sense. I just think it's stone bonkers to have a 24/7 limit of 20 miles per hour, where, frankly, it's not appropriate. But it's happened here in Wales, and GB News' Christina Curtis went out today into the streets of Cardiff to get some public reaction. And remember, we touched on it a moment ago, in a country of 3 million people, 460,000 people have signed a petition to say they don't agree with 20 miles per hour. That is an absolutely astonishing number. Let's have a look at what Christina found on the streets earlier on today.
We had between half an hour to an hour on my 10-hour shift, which involves then losing possible jobs that I could carry out or that I used to carry out before. What worries me the most is that this, I think, is just the beginning of pushing people out of cars, and I'm fearing I might be made redundant because of it one day.
The 20-mile-per-hour speed limit has been in place for more than a month now, but many drivers in the country still don't agree with the restrictions and say that it's causing confusion on the roads.
I've got people tailgating me. You can see in the mirror people gesticulating. I put a badge on the back of my car to say I don't agree with the 20 mile an hour, because I want people to know I'm not doing it because I agree with it, I'm doing it because it's the law and I have to do it. I've experienced people overtaking me dangerously. You can see in the rearview mirror people pointing their fingers, and it would be okay if it was clear cut and straight. what we're supposed to do, but it isn't.
A spokesperson for the Welsh Government said that they recognise this is a major change, but that it's making communities safer. They said they're gathering feedback from local authorities to help them apply exceptions to the default 20 mph speed limit where it's appropriate to do so. However, they said it is too early to provide an evidence-based assessment. Christina Curtis in Cardiff for GB News.
So if it's too early, I'm speaking to the Welsh Government now directly, if it's too early to produce an evidence-based assessment, how the hell can you say it's going to make people safer? I mean, frankly, they're not quite telling us the truth about this. Now, I'm joined to discuss this and much else by Matt Goodwin, pollster and Professor of Politics at the University of Kent. You've been busy polling, Matt, over the course of the last few days.
Yep.
What does the country think? Because there are significant numbers of people who are now part of the anti-car lobby.
Yep.
What does the country think about these 20-mile zones?
Yeah, so we already know this is really unpopular in Wales. We've polled voters in all of Britain, so this is across the country, and we only find that 30%, less than a third, would like to see the 30-mile-an-hour limit reduced to 20 miles an hour in built-up areas. So this is a very unpopular policy. Now, if you lean to the right of politics, if you're a Conservative, about 60% of Conservatives say they're opposed to this change. So this isn't really a popular policy at all.
No, I don't think it is. But I suspect that, you know, if you live in a very big city, a London, you know, a West Midlands, then you probably don't have a car because a car's a blooming nuisance. But if you live in small town UK or rural, without a car, you frankly can't exist. So I'm guessing it depends a bit where you ask the question. Now, we are the People's Channel, and Matt, you did noble battle with the BBC the other day on their lunchtime politics programme, much to their disgust. But you have been out with people polling on behalf of the People's Channel to find out what people really think about the scenes that we've had on the streets of London, Birmingham, Manchester, Edinburgh and elsewhere. We're always told by our political class that it doesn't matter about numbers. Immigration doesn't matter about numbers. We are a model of total success for integration of migrant communities into society. Anyone that dares answer back against that in public is vilified. I should know. What have you discovered about attitudes towards integration of all the different communities in the UK?
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting if you look at what the commentators in London are saying, particularly after Suella Braverman's recent comments that multiculturalism might not be working. We have this narrative in London particularly, which is this is an unalloyed success story. But actually, when we ask voters across the country, do you think that migrants are integrating well into Britain? Only 30% nationally. Only 30% of people feel that immigrants are integrating well into the rest of the country. So as we've been sat at home over the last 2 weeks, I think looking at these scenes, looking at people glorifying terrorism on the streets of Britain, looking at people celebrating the murder and the rape of Jews in Israel, I think actually, Nigel, this is a watershed moment, actually, in our debate about immigration and integration, because it is simply no longer plausible, after the events of the last 2 weeks, to argue that immigration and multiculturalism are only ever positive, because clearly that is not the case, and many voters out there feel the same way.
No, that's right. And I bet we're the only broadcast channel in the UK that would even dare to ask that question, let alone broadcast the answer. But what really interested me was when we went on, and we've heard the German Chancellor, we've heard this week the French Interior Minister, saying that if you're here glorifying terrorism, we don't give a damn about the European Court of Human Rights. We're just going to start deporting people. And yet, as soon as that issue gets raised in this country, they all throw their hands up in absolute horror. What is the real attitude of British folk towards those that glorify terrorism? What would they like to see done?
So I've been polling a long time, and there are policies where sometimes you are quite surprised by the numbers, where there's almost consensus on an issue, and this is one of them. If you ask voters, as I've done across Britain, what do you think we should do to foreign nationals who are glorifying Islamist terrorism on the streets of Britain? 3/4 of the country say those people should be deported out of Britain.
Well,
but again,
I mean, and this is not reflected at all, is it, in the debate we see in the House of Commons, the House of Lords, or in most of our national media?
I think that's true. I spend a lot of my time, as you know, and some of the people here know, presenting the case as to what people really think. And the reason we ask these questions is because so few other pollsters do. People out there want to have a conversation about what's happening to Britain. They want to have a conversation about these issues around migration, border security, integration, the future of our communities. And I think many people now feel as though they can't really talk about those issues. It's being swept under the carpet. And if you do challenge the consensus on those issues, as we've seen with, say, Suella Braverman and other politicians, you're attacked and you're criticised and you're berated, even though you are often representing the views and the values of a majority of people in this country. And I think a lot of people out there, to be blunt, Nigel, are sick of it. I think they want a different national conversation.
No, I think you're right. These people certainly do. And 3/4 of people in favour of deporting those who act in this way. How many strongly in favour of them staying?
About 4%.
4%.
4% would oppose it.
So the rest are undecided, folks. But almost the 4% who think, yeah, just say what you like on Britain's streets and stay, that number's almost as powerful as the 3/4 figure.
So if you look at all of these issues that are dismissed as culture wars, immigration, sex, gender, our history, what you often find is that it's a small activist minority of no more than about 15% of Britain maximum, who are basically dictating the agenda, who are basically changing the guidance in schools, changing the guidance in the NHS, saying we should have weaker borders, saying we should allow refugees in from Gaza. But if you ask real people out there in the country, and one of the reasons we do the polling is we want to know what the real people out there are thinking and feeling, they often really do not agree with this agenda. They feel that it's being imposed on them from the top down, and they feel that they can't really express their view about what they want to happen to their home, their country, and this is our home. So they feel very strongly about it. And I hope that the views of ordinary people will find their way into our national debate in a much bigger way going forward.
And a quick final thought. Mark Drakeford seems to be really quite confused about what a woman is. What does the great British public think about people? And by the way, we're not being hateful or intolerant to those that genuinely have problems or want to be a different sex. But this business of a man becomes a woman, says he's a woman and wants to play tennis or football or whatever it is, what does the great British public think?
Yeah, so here's another example of where the elites are out of step with the masses. Mark Drakeford has come out and said he thinks a transgender woman is really a woman. We asked voters, again, across Britain, is a transgender woman, so somebody who was biologically a male at birth but now identifies as a woman, are they a woman? And only 30% of people in Britain think they are. 44% think they're not. So again, the sort of views that are being imposed on us by this sort of elite group are not really reflecting the views of people.
And young people making up most of the 30%.
Well, here's the interesting thing. The only group in British society who now think a transgender woman is a woman are the 18 to 24s, where 64% of them do. If you're over 60, about 17% hold the same view.
It all goes to show what you can do through the education system. But the figures on it's your fault, you're a university professor.
At the University of Kent, I would add.
But the figures on deporting those who would glorify terrorism, I think we'd all agree. I think our viewers will agree. And I hope the rest of mainstream media are listening, because this is the People's Channel and we're representing the people's views with people's polling. In a moment, it's Barrage the Farage. These Cardiffians have their go at me. All of that in a couple of minutes.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
OK, here we are in Cardiff. It's Farage to Farage. Questions have been submitted, chosen by the team. All I know are their Christian names. I haven't got an earthly clue what Mark is going to ask me. Good evening.
Well, good evening, Nigel, and welcome to Wales.
Thank you.
My question to you is, how do you create a viable political home for the silent majority in Wales and break the one-party dictatorship that is damaging our great country so badly?
Well, I don't think there's an easy answer to that. You know, we sat here a moment ago with Andrew RT Davies, who seems a perfectly decent bloke in many ways. But, you know, however much he can criticise what Drakeford and the gang are doing, I'm afraid the Conservative Party are a rather broken brand themselves. So we are at one of those slightly miserable periods in British politics. I mean, you know, my great campaign of my life was to get us free from the European Union. We've done that. The fact we're not using it is deeply frustrating. Yeah. So look, I think in life, you know, bad things never last forever and good things never last forever. And I think we're heading towards a point and it won't be now and it won't be before the next Welsh Parliament elections here or the general election, but I think there's going to be a realignment of politics that's going to happen. You cannot have, you say the silent majority, look at Professor Goodwin's polling.
Yeah.
74% versus 4%. Think bad dudes should be deported. You know, so you can't, that gap can't last forever. I am optimistic that after the next general election, we will get a reconfiguration of British politics. I'm minded to say that if we didn't have the first past the post electoral system, it might have happened years ago. And I think the system is holding us back very, very badly. You?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
Yeah. You know what, Mark? We need radical reform of the whole thing. It's not working right at the moment.
No, it's not.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Sue. Sue, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. It's lovely to see you again. The Conservative Party has been in power for 13 years. Why haven't they reformed the postal voting system?
Good question. Mr Blair brought the postal voting system in. It has been abused wholesale, especially by Labour, in the traditional old Labour seats. I have fought legal actions on this. You can know something's wrong, but to prove it in court is very, very hard indeed. But the idea that, I mean, you know, I don't mind the fact if you're 97 in a wheelchair and you apply for a postal vote, that's fine. You know, you're a soldier serving overseas, that's fine. You know you're going to be on holiday, that's fine. Postal voting used to make up about 2.5% of the votes cast. It now makes up about 20% nationally, and in some central urban constituencies, it can be over 50% of the vote. I have, Sue, bullied the Conservatives again and again and again. It links into Mark's question, really. It's part of the wholesale reform that we need. I've tried, I've bullied them, they just don't want to listen. They say things like, oh, well, it's jolly helpful to us in the rural constituencies. You idiots, you're losing out overall on this. Labour are the big winner, the left are always big winners, and the same thing happened in America. The last American election was the first time ever there'd been mass mail-out ballots, and it favoured the Democrats more than it did the Republicans. The real answer, Sue, to your question is, why haven't they? Because they're useless, they're out of ideas, they haven't got a radical reforming bone in their body. That's my view. Thank you. OK, Kev, good evening.
Evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
My question is, who do you think has got the most charisma? Mark Drakeford or Herman Van Rompuy?
Oh, gosh. This is the chap, for those that don't know, this is the fella that turned up as the President of the European Union in 2010. And we've been told it would be some giant figure who would stop the traffic in Washington and Beijing. Lummy, I thought. They must have picked somebody really good. And it was the former brief Prime Minister of Belgium, Herman Van Rompuy. And he gave this terrible dirge-like speech, and I said, you have the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk. And they all went crackers. I think Drakeford nicks it, actually. I think Drakeford's got more personality than Van Oh dear, Steve, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Who do you think will be our next Prime Minister?
I have almost no doubt that it'll be Keir Starmer. I have almost no doubt that it'll be Keir Starmer. Do you know, I think for the Conservatives, it's now just too late. It's just too late. They've let too many people down. The optimism, the promise, the 80-seat majority, which yours truly did actually help them a little bit at the end with some of that. And the hope, the belief. I mean, so many Red Wall voters, so many called Red Wall, but there's the same in Wales. Labour families for whom UKIP was the sort of gateway drug. They then voted Conservative in 2019, in some cases, for the first time in the history of those families. They've been Labour since the First World War. They were told we control our borders. They were told we've reduced the number of people coming into our country. They were told the men and women running small businesses, life will get easier. None of it's happened. It'll be Starmer, whether you like it or not. I've no doubt they'll be perhaps marginally worse than the current Conservative government. They'll be split, they'll be arguing, but I believe that'll happen. What do you think?
Well, we'll wait and see.
All right. Hedging his bets there, Steve. And finally, Anne, with the last question. Yeah.
Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
Is the Welsh Government anti-motorist?
Do you know, I don't think it's just the Welsh Government. I think we got Sadiq Khan in London bringing in this ULEZ extension, which is only paid by people with old cars. So if you're older or poorer, you pay ULEZ. If you're younger and more affluent, you don't pay ULEZ. I see what is happening with that. I see what is happening with 20-mile-per-hour speed limits. I see it as the state getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I see people who've normally been law-abiding people getting fines, getting penalties, which they've never had in 40 years or more of driving. Ultimately, they want road pricing. They would want, through a black box, to measure what our car does, where it goes, charge us per mile, do us for speeding, and it is just a big state. And, you know, 13 years of Conservative government, and the state's got bigger. And with Labour, it'll get bigger still. And I hate the big state. I believe in the liberty of the individual. Those that break the law should be punished. But to bring in laws, and I've said this about the ULEZ extension, you know, when laws become enemies of men, men become enemies of laws. They want to get rid of cars. It's all, but Anne, come on, it's all to save the planet.
So they say.
All to save the planet whilst China builds 80 brand new coal-fired power stations this very year. Thank you to all of you for your questions. In a moment, an extraordinary story. Adam Hart lives in Wales, the great-grandson of a man who made the most incredible escape from Nazi Germany. His great-grandson has retraced that mission, and the fact we're here in an RAF club, it's going to be a great story to tell. Back with you in just a couple of minutes.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows,
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, it was 80 years ago. It was 1943 when Welshman squadron leader Frank Griffiths was shot down over Annecy in France. He was delivering supplies to the resistance. As I understand it, there were 11 people killed on that plane, but he managed to escape. He was seriously, badly hurt. He was patched up by a French doctor. He probably should if he was sensible, have given himself in and become a prisoner of war. But no, that wasn't what Frank decided to do. And he managed through an extraordinary journey, despite, you know, broken arm and all the rest of it, to make his way to Gibraltar, to get back to the country because he wanted to rejoin the war effort. These stories are astonishing and extraordinary. But what I loved was the fact that his great-grandson, who's sitting in front of me, who also lives in Wales, Adam Hart, you've decided to honour your great-grandfather by following his mission. Tell me all about it.
Exactly. Well, it was always family folklore, really, his tale. So I decided, sort of a post-university gap year, right, I'm going to go and do it. I'm going to retrace it as faithfully as possible. Obviously, I flew into Geneva safely, didn't crash a plane or anything like that. Went south across Europe, hiked over the Pyrenees, trying to follow his same route. Met up with lots of descendants of people who'd saved his life, pretty much. And
what, sort of two or three generations on?
Yeah, well, so it depended. Sometimes it was elderly people who had been alive while Frank was there. They were, you know, in their 80s, so obviously very old, but they were still incredibly touched by the story. I mean, just talking about it would bring them to tears. So proud of their family history, and France has got a much more complicated relationship with
the risk they were taking. If they were sheltering and helping your great-grandfather, if the Germans had found them, they'd probably been taken outside and shot.
Yes, exactly, yeah, or interrogated, tortured, deported, but death, most likely eventually. I mean, there's 3 or 4 people at least who had helped Frank who were later arrested and, you know, off to Germany, and that's where the record ends. Yeah. Nobody ever heard from them again. So it really was life or death for this random British pilot who just happened to crash near to them. And, you know, 1943, the war wasn't won.
Far from it.
Exactly. It was, you know, less than half of the local population would have been resistors, so most of the population would have been collaborators. So for him to make it out and for them to take that risk is, yeah, it's extraordinary, really, yeah.
I mean, he made it, you know, despite these injuries, he makes it from Annecy to Switzerland. Now, he could have called it quits in Switzerland, couldn't he?
He could have, yeah. He could have been interned there. He had the option to be interned there for the rest of the war. But, as you said in your intro, he decided to carry on because he knew he needed to get back to the war. But mostly, he had a wife and a 6-month-old baby at home who he wanted to see again, and that was his real driving force behind him. There's a lovely photo of my grandmother, the 6-month-old baby, and on the back of the photo it says, on the train to RAF Tempsford, Frank's base, and Ruth, his wife, is feeding the baby, and it just says, off to pick up Tessa's belonging, off to pick up Frank's belongings. Yeah. He's been shot down in France, and we don't know if he's alive. And it's dated in August 1943.
And they wouldn't have known whether he was alive for a long time?
Yeah, 3 months. 3 months, they had no idea.
So how long did it take you to do this journey?
Well, I took 1 month. His escape was 118 days. I took a month, but I did do the Pyrenean section day to day, so I tried to follow that as faithfully as possible. Actually, I couldn't keep up with him. It was brutal. They were doing it at night time, we were doing it in the daytime. Obviously, nobody was trying to capture me. I don't know how he managed to do it. Yeah.
Do you think enough of your generation, Adam, feel that connection with that generation? I mean, the war is now, as I say, you know, nearly 80 years ago that it ended.
Yeah, well, I think it's difficult because the more time passes, the harder. Yeah, people have less understanding, of course, and it's less. It's, you know, just weighs less on your mind, but when you do something like this, you realise what a huge event this obviously was. You know, we all remember where we were in COVID, but this was several leagues above. Yeah. Everybody's great-grandparents from my generation, everybody's lives were touched by this in a huge way. You know, I had other great-grandfathers in El Alamein, in Norway, in the fjords in Norway. Just, they all have their own stories. So yeah, it is, doing something like this really does make you realise how important it was. Yeah.
Well, I have to say, I think your story, Adam, is a very good story. I have to say, I think your great-grandfather's is a little bit better. But no, very, very well done, you, for going out there, recreating it. Big hand for Adam. Now, we are, as I mentioned earlier, we're in an RAF club here on the outskirts of Cardiff. And following on from Adam's story, I thought it was appropriate to mention this. During the war that we've just been discussing, a lot of airmen that got shot down finished up being pretty badly burnt, pretty badly scarred. And they were fortunate in one way that there was a very, very clever man called Sir Archibald Mackindo, who was a pioneering early plastic surgeon. And he set up in East Grinstead the burns unit. And these chaps would go in, often in a very, very poor condition, in many cases having to undergo lots and lots of operations. But for Mackindo, it wasn't just about getting them physically mended, it was about getting them accepted back in society. And so the nurses would take them to cinemas, would take them to the local pubs. East Grinstead was called the town that didn't stare at people because of how they looked. And there were 649 men that went through this, who had 2 operations or more, who formed what was known as the Guinea Pig Club, because Mackindo referred to them as his guinea pigs. And indeed, there is a pub at East Grinstead called the Guinea Pig. And they, for 50 or 60 years, had their annual reunion. It was called the Lost Weekend. Well, the last of them, and he was a Polish pilot, Jan, and I can't really pronounce it, Strankic, better known as Eddie Black in the RAF, has just died aged 101. And there's a picture of him there on the screen, wearing his medals, just died aged 101. And the last guinea pig has gone. But we remember the brave men who did what they did, and those here on the ground too, who helped them so much. Well, it's almost become a ritual. It's time for Bell and Sperling!
Come, we want the salty air. It's cancel culture, it's just not fair. Why deny us? GB News is non-biased. So if you switch off GB, there'll be nothing for you to see. You'll be left with a channel that's biased, that's BBC. They tell you what to watch, they think they've got the power. Now they want to make you drive 20 miles an hour. It's not unusual to have Labour kill debate. And if they get in, they will be in a right old state. Hey, 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 does Nigel says just how it is. With GB News, and Nigel says just as it is. We take on everybody's views, 'cause Nigel's always on the ball. Nigel says.
The Welsh Parliament has passed this law.
Nigel says.
Unbelievable. 20 miles an hour.
Nigel says.
Literally is crackers.
He's Nigel Farage.
Very good indeed. Well, thank you. Very much indeed. Well done, boys. And I can tell you,
Hello again, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Some clear spells out there first overnight, but where we see the clear spells, we also see some mist and fog developing, and quite a number of showers will arrive in many places by dawn. A large area of low pressure to the west of the UK is swinging various weather fronts our way over the next few days, and in between the fronts we'll see some clear spells, but also some showers. A gap in between the systems across northern England into the Midlands, East Anglia overnight could lead to some fog patches by dawn. Otherwise, a lot of cloud on the map as we begin Thursday. That means a mild start, but it also means a bit of a gloomy start. There'll be showers or longer spells of rain across many parts of the country, potential for some heavy rain around the south coast, and some persistent rain setting up across the north and east of Scotland with gales for Shetland and Orkney. Now, because of the increasingly persistent rain across eastern Scotland, there's a rain warning in force. It's not going to be as wet as it was last week, but any additional rainfall, of course, could cause some issues. Elsewhere, it's showers and some frequent heavy downpours in places. They'll continue into Friday across Northern Ireland, Western England, Wales, with some thunder and hail thrown in as well. More persistent rain continues across central and eastern Scotland, the north and east of England as well. And more unsettled weather on the way for Saturday and Sunday, with low pressure continuing to dominate.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can